Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mari-chan, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Guess what? We are finally on the final volume of the disabled tyrant's beloved pet fish, also known as 残疾暴君的掌心鱼宠, by Xue Shan Fei Hu. I don't know about you guys, but I'm excited because the way the last book ended, it was just like, assassin! So I'm like, okay, well, let's see what happens. So anyway, I hope you all enjoy. Chapter 115, Fish Baby Therapy. Prince Ting pulled open the curtain inside the tent. Wang Xi was standing guard outside for the night and hadn't gone to bed yet. Your Highness, don't worry, he said hurriedly when he saw Prince Ting. I'll go take a look. Prince Ting nodded and gestured for Wang Xi to be careful, and Wang Xi ducked out of the tent. Prince Ting looked down at the children. They didn't seem affected by being forced to sleep somewhere different from their usual. They were so fast asleep that their cheeks were rosy. Prince Ting carried the children over to Li Yu and wrapped all the fish up together in a brocade quilt. Then he unsheathed his sword and stood next to the bed, silent. Li Yu was a little nervous and kept trying to comfort himself. Even though he wasn't sure what the Sixth Prince was going to do, he didn't think he'd be able to manage anything too drastic. Together, he and Prince Ting waited for Wang Xi's news. Before too long, Wang Xi rushed back in. He took a deep breath. Your Highness, it's a mess out there, he whispered. The guards on patrol discovered that a man had snuck into Concubine Lu's tent. They presumed it was an assassin, but it turned out to be an old acquaintance of Concubine Lu's. Li Yu was taken aback. Upon consideration, Wang Xi's words held deep implications. Concubine Lu was the mother of the 8th and youngest prince, and she'd also attended the hunting festival. Why would an old acquaintance of a concubine with a promising future suddenly appear right under the emperor's watchful eyes? What's more, the concubines who came with the emperor to the hunting grounds had their own tents at night, but they were still all concentrated in one area. Concubine Lu's was in the innermost part. It was guarded by servants and palace attendants in shifts, and several troops of guards stood on the outside. A skilled master would struggle to sneak in, much less a random acquaintance, and they had done it unnoticed. That was quite suspicious. What kind of old acquaintance had to come to the hunting grounds during the festival to sneak into someone's tent in the middle of the night? Li Yu thought of a melodramatic possibility. No way! Was the so-called acquaintance actually Concubine Lu's lover and they were having a secret date? Was he able to sneak in so smoothly because Concubine Lu was acting from the inside? How else could you explain how long it took the guards to notice? In ancient times, it was taboo for a woman and a man to be alone together. If the emperor's consort was found with an unfamiliar man, she would either be sentenced to death or cast to the cold palace. Concubine Lu and the man were old acquaintances. Wasn't that basically proof that she was cheating on the emperor? When Li Yu heard the shouts of "Assassin!" outside, he really thought it must be an assassin sent by the Sixth Prince, or that the assassin must at least be related to him in some way, but instead, it was just Concubine Lu cheating on the emperor? Wang Xi was very considerate toward the emperor. He called the man the concubine's acquaintance and didn't mention anything about cheating or the circumstances under which the man was discovered. It took Li Yu a moment to realize what he meant, almost like Sibao. They hadn't caught any assassins. They had caught two lovers in the act. This didn't happen in the novel. This was a common plot that happened in palace novels, though, so Li Yu wasn't sure if Concubine Lu's affair was real or if she was being framed by someone else. Either way, a man had been found in her tent. The emperor must be furious. Tianchi, do you want to go take a look? Li Yu wasn't sure himself. Prince Ting slowly shook his head. At a time like this, the emperor would definitely want as few people there as possible. If a prince rushed over, he would embarrass the emperor instead of being a comforting presence. But it would also seem rude if Prince Ting didn't show any concern. What should they do? Got it! Li Yu's gaze landed on Dabao. Dabao was currently sleeping soundly, dreaming of fish food and huge chicken legs. Something suddenly touched his cheek. Opening his eyes, he found that his fish father was smiling at him. Dabao rubbed his eyes and sat up. Still smiling, Liu said, "I'm sorry for waking you up, Dabao, but can you help Daddy out with something urgent?" Dabao was the oldest, and he had to protect both his brothers and his dads. He quickly said, "Yes." Liu met Prince Sing's eyes and picked Dabao up, and they all headed toward the Emperor's dragon tent together. Head Eunuch Luo was anxiously pacing around outside. The Emperor was so outraged with concubine Lu that he refused to drink a sip of water and wouldn't see the imperial physician. When Head Eunuch Luo saw Prince Sing and his consort come with their little heir, his eyes lit up and he ran in to report it. Li Yu and Prince Sing waited outside. Not long after, the sixth prince arrived as well. Soon, Head Eunuch Luo let Prince Sing's family go in, but he didn't so much as mention the sixth prince. Li Yu and Prince Sing entered the dragon tent. It had been so bustling and lively earlier during the day, but now the tent was empty. The ground was a mess, with fragments of cups and bowls scattered all over. The Emperor sat on the dragon throne, alone, with a dejected air about him. It looked like he'd aged several years since they'd last seen him. The Emperor had already interrogated concubine Lu, and she was now confined somewhere alone. The appearance of a strange man in his young consort's tent had dealt the Emperor a heavy blow. He was in a terrible mood. "What are you doing here?" he demanded rudely. He'd had to send away a bunch of concubines earlier. Was Prince Sting here to hassle him now as well? Li Yu spoke on Prince Sting's behalf. "Royal father, Dabao started to miss you in the middle of the night and couldn't stop crying for you. In the end, we had to bring him to see you." Fish Father had already told Dabao that his grandpa was in a bad mood, so he hurriedly reached out with his chubby little arms. The Emperor's emotions were complicated right now, but he loved this child. He had Luo Zhuisheng bring Dabao over. Dabao kept his arms out the entire time, and when he arrived in the Emperor's lap, he wrapped the Emperor up in a hug and patted him gently with one hand. "Grandpa, hug," Dabao said in a soft voice. The Emperor suddenly had the urge to cry. Li Yu and Prince Sing watched the Emperor nervously, worried that Dabao might make the angry Emperor even more unhappy. But this was also the only way to get the Emperor to take care of himself at a time like this. "You can all go. Dabao can stay." The Emperor waved his hand, not wanting his son to see him so dispirited. Prince Sing and Li Yu looked at each other, then exited the tent with Head Eunuch Luo. Soon, snacks and tea were brought into the tent, and Dabao's giggling could be heard from inside. Prince Sing, Li Yu, and Head Eunuch Luo all felt relieved. The next day, the Emperor was in high spirits. Though what had happened was unpleasant, it was a private matter, so the Emperor had sent concubine Lu back to the palace during the night. He didn't plan on revealing too much in front of the princes and the ministers, so the hunting festival continued. But before the second hunt started, Prince Li of the imperial clan court arrived in a rush on his horse and asked to see the Emperor, stating that there was something to discuss. The Emperor glanced at all the flags fluttering on the hunting grounds and knew that the hunt very well might be over. Prince Li had heard about concubine Lu's incident and had come to see what the Emperor had to say about it. Concubine Lu was the eighth prince's mother. After all this, what was the eighth prince supposed to do? Not to mention that if this man was an old acquaintance of concubine Lu's, she must have known him before she entered the palace. As for whether or not they kept in contact after she entered the palace, the two of them had been in the same tent. This cast some doubts on the eighth prince's parentage. Prince Li tried his best to persuade the Emperor. "Your Majesty, the imperial bloodline cannot be tainted. Please make a decision." He had brought two elderly imperial physicians along with him. As the Emperor's younger brother and the head of the imperial clan court, Prince Li was in charge of royal family affairs. It was obvious that he'd come here to ask the Emperor for permission to test the eighth prince's true heritage. Although the royal family had a method for testing this, it was secret. It could only be used when the legitimacy of a member of the royal family came under doubt, and with the Emperor's permission. This caution was to keep the method confidential, so it couldn't be exploited by others. The emperor hesitated for a moment. If Prince Li hadn't come now, he would have sought him out once he returned to the palace anyway. Since they were already at this point, they might as well test it. If he dragged it on for too long, perhaps the 8th prince himself would start having doubts too. The emperor was about to agree when Prince Li knelt and took out a document from his sleeves. Your Majesty, to be honest, there's another important matter. The night before I came, this somehow appeared on my desk in my study. I didn't believe it at first, but when I heard that something had happened at the hunting festival, I felt it was suspicious. Prince Li presented the document. The emperor took it and glanced over it. It was a letter to Prince Li, revealing 2 secrets. One was that concubine Lu was having an affair, and the other was that Prince Xing's sons weren't his biological children. The letter contained the name and place of birth of the person concubine Lu was having an affair with, and certain suspicious aspects of Prince Xing's children. As the head of the imperial clan court, Prince Li received at least 800 requests a day. There was no shortage of baseless rumors. If he believed everything he received, he wouldn't have time to do anything else. He'd intended to dismiss it at first, but when he heard about concubine Lu's affair at the hunting grounds and started looking into the man's identity, Prince Li's heart sank. Most of the information about concubine Lu in the letter was true. What about Prince Xing then? Prince Li thought about how much the emperor had come to care for Prince Xing's son, as well as his expectations for Prince Xing himself. If the letter was true, how could he sit still? He hurried over, not only for the sake of the 8th prince, but for the emperor as well. What should we do, Your Majesty? Prince Li thought it was better to kill an innocent than to accidentally let the guilty go. Since they were already doing the tests, why not test Prince Xing's son as well? According to the letter, Prince Xing had 4 sons while he was at the western border. It was well known that people who were born mute could pass it on to their children. The fact that none of Prince Xing's sons were afflicted with the same condition was suspicious by itself. Disregarding everything else, Prince Li agreed with that one point. The emperor's face darkened as he kept reading. Prince Li was afraid that the emperor would be angry at him, but the emperor didn't do anything to him even after he finished reading the letter. I understand, he said. You can go. Don't speak of this to anyone. Prince Li left, heart beating faster. It was minutes later that he remembered the emperor hadn't made a decision on the 8th prince yet. The emperor read the letter a couple of times, thinking about the way Dabao cared for him, and came to a conclusion. He ordered Luo Zheisheng to summon Prince Xing to the dragon tent as soon as possible. Tianzhi, you have to be careful. Li Yu glanced at their surroundings and wrote a 6 in Prince Xing's palm. Concubine Lu's incident, Prince Li's appearance. He felt like the 6th prince had a hand in both. Prince Xing understood. He had the same suspicions, but he wanted Li Yu to wait for him without worrying. Prince Li was the head of the imperial clan court. If he came rushing over from the palace, that meant that there must be some urgency to the situation. He'd passed by Prince Li earlier, and Prince Li hadn't been able to meet his eyes. Prince Xing was almost certain that Prince Li's business was related to him. When he entered the dragon tent, a folded document came flying at his head. Prince Xing was alert and could tell that the document wouldn't reach him. Instead, it fell to the floor half a foot away from him. Prince Xing could sense the emperor's rage. He picked up the document and looked it over. One glance was all it took for him to know the 6th prince's plan. As it turned out, concubine Lu was only bait. She was being used to draw the emperor's attention onto the children. Since there weren't many confidants around the 6th prince, it was difficult for Prince Xing to send someone to keep an eye on him. The 6th prince was cunning and only trusted himself, so it was impossible to know the precise details of whatever he was planning. But since Prince Li had rushed here overnight with imperial physicians, it meant they intended to test the legitimacy of the children, right? Without concubine Lu, the emperor might not have believed what the letter said. But because concubine Lu's betrayal came first, the emperor was more sensitive to matters like these. He would definitely have all the children tested. That was the purpose of the document. Prince Xing was waiting for the emperor's announcement. Instead, though, to his surprise, the dissatisfied emperor said, "Tianchi, someone wants to harm Dabao. Do you know who it is?" The emperor hadn't been tricked by the letter at all. Instead, he wanted to protect Dabao. That's what I'm talking about, Emperor. Finally, you're getting it. Chapter 116. Fish Hide and Seek. If it had been any of his other grandchildren, the emperor might not have been so concerned. He would have most likely taken the opportunity to have them tested. People were always suspicious of people or things they weren't familiar with. But the emperor remembered that 3 of Prince Sing's children looked a great deal like Prince Sing when he was younger, and the last one looked like the consort. He wasn't blind. How could he doubt something so obvious? What made him the most concerned was the identity of the person who had given Prince Li this information. Concubine Lu's affair was a scandal, and the emperor had ordered Luo Zheisheng to suppress any news of it. How had Prince Li found out? The trust the emperor had in Prince Li didn't develop overnight. It had accumulated slowly since they were children. Otherwise, he would never have let this younger brother of his take over the imperial clan court and handle the royal family affairs. He was sure that this wasn't some plot of Prince Li's, so someone must have leaked the news to him. First, there was an incriminating letter. Then Prince Li learned of Concubine Lu's affair. He would naturally take the letter seriously and even come to the hunting grounds to talk to the emperor. Under most circumstances, the emperor would listen to Prince Li. If the emperor hadn't been very familiar with Prince Sing's children, it was likely that Prince Sing's children and the 8th prince would be tested. And then what would happen? The informant already wrote it clearly in the letter. They wanted to prove that the children weren't Prince Sing's and thus not part of the royal bloodline. The emperor had fought for the throne before, and he knew what sorts of underhanded methods one could use to do it. But that was what also made him angry. No matter what the result of the 8th prince's test was, the emperor would always feel a little uncomfortable around him because of Concubine Lu. If there was anything amiss with Prince Sing's children, then it was probably over for Prince Sing too. What a vicious plan, to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. If it had succeeded, both the 8th prince and Prince Sing would be out of the picture. Fortunately, he trusted the children, so he saw through this malicious plot. Otherwise, if he had been deceived, what would have happened to Dabao? The emperor was too afraid to continue that train of thought. "Tianchi, do you have any ideas?" he asked Prince Sing, hoping that his son would notice the same thing he did. Prince Sing had thought it over several times already. He realized that the emperor's protectiveness over Dabao meant he would have to change up his plan a little. Prince Sing gave it some thought and asked for a brush and a paper from the emperor. He quickly wrote, "Using Concubine Lu as bait, someone is trying to frame me and Dabao." The emperor nodded. Prince Sing clearly had some brain cells. Okay. Since the emperor asked, Prince Sing let him know about the previous incident. A couple of days ago, a thief had snuck into his manor, wanting to take Dabao's blood, but had taken someone else's by mistake instead. Prince Sing explained it cleverly so that the emperor wouldn't notice he was using the enemy's plan against them. As for who was behind the thief, Prince Sing knew that he would seem suspicious if he spoke the truth outright. He trusted the emperor to work out who would reap the most reward from this plan. The emperor finally understood why Dabao and Prince Sing were being framed, despite looking so obviously similar. From what Prince Sing said, it was clear that this was a long-standing plot. Then what about Concubine Lu? The emperor recalled Concubine Lu begging him on her knees. They had indeed caught a strange man in her tent, and she had admitted that she'd known this man when she was a child, but she promised again and again that they had never had any further contact after she entered the palace. She truly didn't know why he'd suddenly appeared in the hunting grounds or why he had entered her tent. Was something amiss with that whole incident as well? It was a good thing he hadn't killed anyone in his fury last night. Otherwise, there'd be nobody to verify any of it. Concubine Lu had been sent back to the palace overnight. The emperor decided to interrogate the man who'd been beaten within an inch of his life by the guards for some more clues. Stay here. There's no need to go back, he told Prince Ting. I'll find out the truth. It wasn't because the emperor didn't trust Prince Ting, but because he wanted to lead those behind the scenes into a false sense of security. If they thought Prince Ting had been locked up, they could continue their plan. Prince Ting understood that the emperor had his own plans. He quickly knelt down. Tianchi, what's wrong? The emperor didn't understand what Prince Ting meant by this. Prince Ting pointed in the direction of his own tent and looked at the emperor. The emperor furrowed his brow. Are you worried about Li Yu and the children? Don't worry. I'll have Lord Ruisheng pass along a message for you. Prince Ting slowly shook his head. Not just worried. The emperor recalled the intimacy between Prince Ting and his consort and helplessly said, Then write a letter yourself and have Lord Ruisheng bring it over with an item of yours as proof. That ought to be fine, right? Prince Ting hesitated for a moment, but shook his head again. Then what do you want? The emperor was a little annoyed that he couldn't get it right, and he raised his voice without noticing. Should I bring them over and reunite you all? Is that enough for you? The emperor wasn't serious, but Prince Ting clasped his hands together and thanked him. The emperor almost exploded from anger, but he waved his hand and said, Fine, I'll have Lord Ruisheng personally make the trip. Head Eunuch Luo agreed immediately and asked Prince Ting if there was anything he wanted him to take with him. Prince Ting lowered his head and pulled out a silver bead on a red string from his collar. Though the emperor was annoyed and didn't want to show that he cared, he caught a glimpse of more than one object hanging around Prince Ting's neck. In addition to the silver bead, there was also something that looked like a round rock? What the hell is that? Prince Ting was about to hand over the silver bead, but after a moment, he took it back and kept kneeling. Can you make up your mind? The emperor asked impatiently. Prince Ting's eyes flashed, asking the emperor for his forgiveness, and made the request he actually wanted. While Prince Ting went to see the emperor, Li Yu stayed in the tent with the children. He wasn't used to not having anyone he could discuss matters with. Even though they didn't really know how to walk, a small tent wasn't enough to contain their childlike playfulness. Li Yu had no choice but to play with them to distract them, as well as to distract himself. Prince Ting didn't return for a long time, and Li Yu felt the worry and panic from when he was left alone in the other residence start to bubble up again. Stay steady. You have to trust him. You can't do anything impulsive. Li Yu had to take a deep breath to calm himself down. Daddy! Sibao's little voice piped up. Coming back to his senses, Li Yu found that the children were holding tightly on the edges of his clothes. You still have kids. Don't panic. Li Yu smiled and picked up each one, kissing them. Do you want to play hide and seek or tug of war? The children looked at each other. Tug of war wasn't very interesting, because whichever side Fish Daddy was on would win. They unanimously decided to play hide and seek. Li Yu had one child cover his eyes with a handkerchief while he and the others went to hide. Since they couldn't quite walk, Li Yu didn't make it hard for them. He barely hid before they found him. Soon, it was his turn to seek. Li Yu was blindfolded by Arbao and Sanbao. The children didn't know how to tie a knot, but Dabao had an idea. He pulled Wang Xi over to help. Wang Gongong covered his mouth and laughed, then helped them tie the blindfold. Dabao, Arbao, Sanbao, and Sibao split up. If they couldn't walk fast, they'd crawl. If they couldn't crawl fast, they'd roll. Dabao headed straight for the curtain, lifted it up, and hid behind it. Arbao and Sanbao found a bamboo basket and got into it at the same time. But their heads collided, and they realized this wasn't a good spot. Then they found a table and both got under it. But when they bonked their heads together again, they decided it still wasn't quite right. The two children rubbed their foreheads and looked at each other before coming to a sudden realization. One hid under the table while the other hid in the bamboo basket. Sibao looked around, lifted the brocade quilt, and lay under it. Li Yu counted from 1 to 10 and started his search. He'd barely pulled the handkerchief down when he saw that the curtain had a bulge for some reason. The bamboo basket that had been standing before was knocked over, revealing half a butt, and someone was hiding just his head under the table. Li Yu laughed and coughed lightly. To make it more exciting, he put the handkerchief back on his face before trying to capture the children. "Daddy can find you even if he's blindfolded," he declared mightily. He pulled the children out from under the bamboo basket and table and pushed the curtain aside suddenly. The children's shrieks and laughs rose and fell. Li Yu had already found 3 of them and was on his way to finding the 4th. It wasn't a big tent. The only place left was the bed. Confident, Li Yu started feeling his way toward the bed. Suddenly, he felt something tall, large, and firm. What was something like that doing in the tent? The children's voices became louder, and they all called happily, "Daddy!" Li Yu felt an arm and a leg. He hurriedly took off the handkerchief that was covering his eyes, but before he could get a clear look, he was wrapped up in a heated kiss. Li Yu was startled, but when he recognized Prince Sting's breathing, he immediately surrendered, almost drowning in the sudden warmth. The children watched as their fish father turned into a steamed fish. It was fine. They were all family anyway. Kissing wasn't a big deal, Li Yu tried to tell himself. He and Prince Sting had only been separated for a little while, so why were they clinging to each other like they'd been apart for ages? Of course, Li Yu had no idea that earlier, when the Emperor asked Prince Sting if he knew anything about the situation, it had felt to Prince Sting like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. All it would take was one wrong step to be shattered to pieces. Despite all that, Prince Sting had survived. He'd even gained the Emperor's trust. Of course, he was relieved when he saw Li Yu again. But he wouldn't tell Li Yu this. "Why are you dressed like that?" Li Yu hugged Prince Sting's arm. Prince Sting had changed into a guard's outfit, which was completely different from what he was wearing when he left. That was why Li Yu hadn't been able to tell who he was just by touch. Prince Sting's lips quirked into a smile, and he succinctly wrote down what happened for Li Yu. "So, Royal Father wants us to go to him?" Li Yu asked, surprised. Prince Sting nodded. It was best to get moving as soon as possible so the news wouldn't get out. Li Yu was confused. Since they were going to meet in the Emperor's tent anyway, why did Prince Sting come back? He could have just sent someone over to fetch them. And why was he wearing the clothes of a guard? Li Yu didn't answer, but the question showed on his face. Prince Sting held Li Yu's hand under his sleeve and pointed at his nose, smiling. Because of him? Li Yu's heart suddenly felt warm. Why did he make this trip? Wasn't it because he was worried about his and the children's safety? Prince Sting had hidden his identity and asked the Emperor for permission just to pick them up. He was so moved that he was getting sniffly, but he was still too embarrassed to ask for another kiss in front of the children. Even so, he was very happy that Prince Sting was so attentive. He held Prince Sting's hand tightly and swung it back and forth a little, trying to demonstrate that he'd remembered this forever. Li Yu and Wang Xi picked up the children and were about to leave, but found that one of them was missing. It turned out that Sibao, hiding in the quilt, had fallen asleep waiting for his fish father to find him. Prince Sting, in his guard disguise, bent down to pick up Sibao from the quilt and guarded him securely. The group didn't get far before they bumped into the sixth prince. "Did something happen, consort, for you to be in such a hurry?" "Ah, and where's fifth royal brother?" It seemed like the sixth prince had just happened to run into Li Yu while taking a walk and asked him a very normal question. But Li Yu knew that this was a test. If he hesitated for too long, or if the sixth prince realized that the guard next to him was Prince Sting, it was over. The image the Emperor had crafted of being furious at Prince Sting would be shattered. How should he answer to avoid suspicion, and how could he get rid of the sixth prince as soon as possible? Luckily, Wang Xi rushed to defend his master and answer for Li Yu. "Your Highness, Prince Sting hasn't returned yet, and the consort would like to see what's going on." Everyone knew that after Prince Li's secret discussion with the Emperor, the emperor had called for Prince Ting. It was true that there'd been no news since then, so what Wang Xi said was believable. He really hasn't come back yet? The sixth prince's eyes lit up. Did his plan work? Was the emperor keeping Prince Ting there because he was suspicious of him? Li Yu nodded with some difficulty. Prince Ting quietly tightened his grip on his sword. If the sixth prince dared to try to harm Xiao Yu, he would move first to protect him. Luckily, the sixth prince was completely focused on Xiao Yu and the children, with Wang Xi interfering too. He failed to notice anything strange about the guard, preoccupied with trying to pry more information from the consort. Everyone was wrapped up in their own thoughts. Li Yu was just trying to figure out how to make a quick, natural getaway when Dabao, who was holding his hand, suddenly started crying. "Dad! My daddy!" Li Yu suddenly had an idea and picked up Dabao to comfort him, saying, "Dabao, don't cry. I'll take you to see him now." Li Yu nodded at the sixth prince and led Dabao away along with Wang Gonggong, with Prince Ting right on their heels. Chapter 117. Brave Fish Babies. Though the sixth prince found it strange that Prince Ting's consort had run off so quickly and disappeared in the blink of an eye, he wasn't particularly close to the new male consort. He was too thrilled over the fact that Prince Ting still hadn't returned, and he quickly forgot any confusion. He didn't try contacting his people again. It would be best to let everything progress as planned. Sending a letter now would be unwise. At most, it would take 2 days for a conclusion to be reached. The sixth prince walked toward his tent, happy with himself. When he entered, he saw his consort looking anxious. He felt like this was an unlucky sign. In the past, he needed to spend a lot of time pandering to her to earn the support of the Marquis of Dingbei and her family, and for the sake of his unborn child. She was sensitive during her pregnancy, and he'd long since lost his patience with her. But since he was in a good mood, he showed her a rare, comforting smile. "Get some rest. Don't tire yourself out too much," he said to her gently. His consort, Lady Liang, was unused to this kind of affection. The sixth prince had treated her coldly for a few months now, but Lady Liang had nowhere to vent her suffering. She knew this child was incredibly important to the sixth prince. The entire family, including herself, had hoped for a son, but the imperial physician said it would be a daughter. Several physicians all said the same. When the sixth prince found out, he didn't blame her, but he did immediately acquire a couple of beautiful concubines, telling her bluntly that in this current situation, he needed a son as soon as possible to prepare for the future. She couldn't blame anyone else for what was going on in her own womb, and her own family supported the sixth prince's decision, asking her to be patient and tolerant. Each day, Lady Liang's mood plummeted further and further, and she had no one to confide in. Before she was married, she'd been a lively girl. Now her mental state was quite delicate, and she would shed tears at the drop of a hat. The sixth prince often visited his other concubines and only came to see her occasionally to keep up the appearance of a loving couple. She couldn't tell if she was compatible with the sixth prince, but she was jealous when she saw how much Prince Ting, a prince just like her husband, doted on his consort. The sixth prince seldom laughed and talked with her like he was now, and she wholeheartedly hoped that such days could continue a little longer. Li Yu, Prince Ting, and Wang Xi continued walking for a while to confirm that the sixth prince wasn't following them before they finally breathed a sigh of relief. Thank goodness for Dabao. Li Yu smiled and picked him up. Dabao had already stopped crying, his dark, grape-like eyes sparkling as he turned his head to look at his fish dad and laughed. Li Yu was surprised. He knew Dabao was smarter than the other children and could understand what the adults were talking about. Had he... Dabao, did you do that on purpose? Li Yu asked quietly, smiling as he pressed Dabao's cheek against his own. Dabao's fat little finger pointed at the figure in the distance. He's bad! The sixth prince usually hid his true self well, and most people couldn't tell what he was thinking. But Dabao, as one of the emperor's favorites, was often taken to Qianqing Palace, where he'd regularly witness the sixth prince's greetings to the emperor. Of course the sixth prince wouldn't do anything untoward in front of the emperor, But when the emperor wasn't paying attention, the sixth prince's gaze on Dabao always turned poisonous. Dabao wasn't even a year old yet, so the sixth prince treated him like an ordinary baby his age and never bothered to conceal his disgust for the child. But Dabao wasn't an ordinary baby. Before he became a human baby, he'd spent 10 months as a young fish. Fish matured faster than humans, and Dabao already understood a lot of things about the world. The sixth prince's unkind gaze made Dabao uncomfortable, and he'd committed to memory the fact that the sixth prince was a bad man. Of course, Dabao was still a child. In the face of a bad guy who made him uncomfortable, his instinct was to get away. The reason he'd cried so hard earlier was to get his fish dad to stay farther away from the bad man. Though it was an accident, Dabao was happy that he could finally protect his fish dad for once. Prince Sing reached over and rubbed his head. Dabao's face turned red with elation. Daddy Prince Sing rubbed his head. Li Yu rewarded Dabao with kisses, determined to cover half of Dabao's face with saliva. Li Yu was in the middle of planting kisses when his vision blurred and he suddenly saw Arbao, Sanbao, and Subao coming over, their chubby little faces wobbling in front of him. When it came to kisses, one should worry less about the lack of them and more about evenly distributing them. Li Yu resisted the urge to laugh and kissed all of them. Everyone, be good. The family of 6, along with Wang Xi, quickly headed toward the dragon tent. The emperor had been waiting for a long time. When he saw Prince Ding and Li Yu arrive with the children, he smiled. "Are you finally at ease?" he teased. He was making fun of the way Prince Ding had begged him earlier, and Prince Ding took it silently. Li Yu looked back and forth between the emperor and Prince Ding, unbearably curious. Though Prince Ding didn't seem to be disgruntled, he put Dabao down. Dabao, king of smoothing situations over, hit the ground and immediately started toddling over to Emperor Grandpa. The emperor was nonchalant about making jibes at his son, but as soon as he saw his grandson, he was elated. He changed the topic immediately. "Doesn't it seem like Dabao is walking much more steadily now?" Li Yu couldn't believe it. Dabao wasn't. Dabao really wasn't. Emperor, you just saw him a couple of hours ago. Don't tell such blatant lies. After a great stumbling ordeal, Dabao finally reached the emperor and grabbed the hem of the dragon robe. The emperor picked him up smiling. With his chubby little grandson in his arms, the emperor felt bitter hatred toward those who were trying to plot against Dabao. If Prince Sing fell out of favor and the 8th prince was spurned, who would benefit? The emperor already knew the answer, but that person had never revealed such ambitions before. Didn't that prove that he knew how to hide and had been putting on an act in front of him all these years? He'd have to force him to make a move and catch him in the act, so there'd be no space for him to argue. The emperor had thought of a thorough plan already, but it required the cooperation of Prince Sting's family. "Dabao, can you help Grandpa with something?" the emperor asked, smiling. He could have just ordered an edict, but he wanted to explain it to Dabao personally. Dabao blinked. He realized that adults liked it when he helped. Fish Dad said it a lot, and Grandpa said it too. Dabao loved Fish Dad and Grandpa, so of course he was willing. Dabao patted his small chest. "Okay." The emperor's eyes filled with a smile, and he continued to tease. "Is it okay even if it hurts?" Dabao scrunched up his chubby little face. Fish Dad had taught him before that he had to keep his word. Dabao was afraid of pain, but he couldn't take it back now. Dabao bravely nodded. "Okay." Li Yu had some idea of what the plan was, but he and Prince Ding couldn't really do anything about it, since this was the emperor's will. The children had been born at the western border, so the gossip surrounding them was inevitable. The emperor was doing all this to silence those with harmful intentions. He also knew that the pain the emperor was talking about wasn't really that painful, but as a father, it was extremely difficult for Li Yu. The emperor called over the imperial physician, and Li Yu turned away. Prince Ding held his hand under their sleeves, and Li Yu pinched his hand hard, as if he were angry. But Prince Ding's brow didn't even twitch. The emperor was worried that Dabao would be afraid, so he held him in his lap. When head eunuch Luo came over to take Dabao's blood, the emperor stared at him coldly the entire time. Luo Zhuisheng had been in his current position for many years now, but his fingers still trembled slightly, seeming even more nervous than Prince Xing's heir in the emperor's lap. Dabao might have said he wasn't afraid, but he still was. He closed his eyes when he saw the needle, but in the end, all that happened was a prick on his finger. Dabao thought it wasn't too bad after all, much better than the time he tried to eat an unpeeled lychee. But when he opened his eyes and looked around, he saw that Fish Dad's eyes were reddened, while Grandpa and Daddy Prince Xing looked like they wanted to hit someone. Weird. "Your Majesty," head eunuch Luo asked bravely, "what about the other gongzes?" Li Yu knew that he was just doing his job, but he practically wanted to strangle him. Watching their older brother get poked with a needle had made the other babies frightened. They didn't dare to even breathe. The emperor was just about to shake his head when Dabao hurriedly spoke up. "Grandpa, me!" Dabao knew that it was still going to hurt a little, and his younger brothers might not be as good at enduring it as he was. If Grandpa needed to poke someone, Dabao would do it for his brothers. Dabao bravely stuck out another finger. The smile in the emperor's eyes grew stronger. "All right." Luo Zhuisheng paused. He didn't know this was a possibility. Dabao thought he was going to be poked again and closed his eyes, scared. But nothing happened. Luo Gogong just took a couple more drops of blood from his already pricked finger. Then the emperor asked for a strip of cloth and personally wrapped it thickly around Dabao's finger. When Dabao was returned to Li Yu hugged him, heart aching. The other babies didn't try to clamor for their fish dad's hug anymore. With Sibao in the lead, they all blew on Dabao's bandaged finger. It wouldn't hurt anymore if they blew on it. The emperor's heart softened as he watched the children. Then he ordered Luo Zhuisheng to go fetch the 8th prince. On the day of Concubine Lu's incident, the 8th prince and the 7th prince had been staying in the tent. There was a lot of yelling that night, and the 8th prince thought it was too noisy, but nobody would tell him what was going on. Ever since then, he hadn't been able to see his mother, and even the 7th prince, who he was normally quite close with, had been avoiding him. The only person kind enough to tell him anything was the 6th prince. He informed him that his mother had been caught with a strange man at night, which left the 8th prince stunned. He was only 7 years old, but he understood what kind of crime this was. His mother had been urgently sent back to the palace, and the servants were all whispering behind his back. When the emperor asked him to be tested, the 8th prince gritted his teeth and agreed. This was the only way to find out who he really was. The emperor got everything ready and had Luo Zhuisheng summon the princes, Prince Li, and a couple of important ministers and the elders of the royal family to the dragon tent. "Prince Li has received a secret report that casts doubt on the royal bloodline," the emperor announced. "I have decided to use the secret method to verify the truth of this accusation." He didn't mention the secret letter or who was to be trusted, only that the blood had already been collected. He ordered the imperial physician who knew the secret method to test the blood immediately. The elders and ministers were shocked. For one thing, the emperor didn't explain whose bloodline was under suspicion, and for another, the jade bottles that held the blood the imperial physician was to test had nothing on them but strange marks, so nobody could tell who they belonged to. Those marks were Li Yu's loving contribution. After he learned about the emperor's plan, Li Yu suggested replacing names with marks so only the emperor knew which was which. The 6th prince was keenly anticipating the emperor's furious reaction after the results were revealed, but he hadn't been expecting the emperor to use this method. Normally, the imperial physician would personally extract the blood to test it, which meant that he would know whose it was. But with the emperor's method, the imperial physician couldn't tell who the blood belonged to. It was clear that the emperor was wary of the imperial physician as well. The safest way to fake the test results would be to bribe the imperial physician. There weren't many imperial physicians who knew the secret method, but because Consort Zhang, the sixth prince's mother, had saved the life of a certain imperial physician Pan in the past, they were able to convince him to test the little heir's blood they had retrieved from Prince Sting's manor. The sixth prince was only able to smoothly launch this battle after imperial physician Pan adamantly promised that the young Schütze was definitely not part of the royal bloodline. The imperial physician, not knowing whose blood it was in which bottle, wasn't really a problem for the sixth prince, since he had already confirmed that Prince Sting's Schütze wasn't really his. But the sixth prince was slightly suspicious as to why the emperor had decided to arrange things this way. Wangxi, what should we do? The sixth prince caught sight of Prince Sting's consort holding the hurt little Schütze, anxiously discussing plans with Wangxi. The emperor had summoned all the princes except the second and third, but there was no sign of Prince Sting either. It seemed the emperor was still holding on to Prince Sting, leaving his consort panicked. The sixth prince ordered his servant to go over and eavesdrop. The consort was quite vigilant, so the servant couldn't get too close, but he heard the consort say the phrases, "can't find him," and "no way to switch them." The sixth prince mulled this over. It seemed the consort was distraught. The consort definitely knew where the little Schütze came from. In light of the emperor's arrangements, the sixth prince wasn't panicked. The ones who should be panicking were Prince Sting's family. So, these measures the emperor had taken were most likely to guard against Prince Sting and to prevent him from meddling. The sixth prince had nothing to worry about. He was sure he'd read the emperor like an open book, so he settled down and waited for the results. On the other hand, the sixth prince's ally, imperial physician Pan, was a little anxious. He had to be extremely cautious when the royal bloodline was involved. Several imperial physicians had separately tested the blood, and when they compared their results, imperial physician Pan came to the sudden realization that all blood samples were of the royal bloodline. Why was it different from the result the sixth prince wanted? Imperial physician Pan was dumbfounded. This concerned the sixth prince's career and future. No matter what, imperial physician Pan had to let the sixth prince know. Claiming he felt unwell and needed to wash his hands, he slipped out in a panic before the test was completed. Chapter 118. Fish babies are the best. Yes, I already agree. Imperial physician Pan hid in an out-of-the-way corner. He'd sent off a pigeon with cloth tied to its feet. He couldn't stay for too long because he'd left saying he was unwell. Just when he was about to lose hope, a man dressed as a servant came up to him. "Are you insane?" the man scolded, irritated. "Looking for the master at a time like this?" "I have urgent news to report," Imperial physician Pan said. Realizing who this man worked for, he blurted out the entire situation, explaining the results of the test. This was a huge problem, and the servant couldn't make any decisions himself. He frowned and had the imperial physician wait as he personally reported the news to the sixth prince. Imperial physician Pan had no choice but to keep hiding there. Luckily, the sixth prince was in a small tent not too far away. There was no way he was about to run out to meet imperial physician Pan himself, and even if he was close by, he would still make his confidant handle it. When he heard about the situation, the sixth prince was shocked as well. What was going on? Prince Sting's heir's blood had definitely been tested. Why was there no problem with the results? Could it be that Prince Sting had acted before he did? It must be Prince Sting. This was the only explanation. Prince Sting again. The sixth prince unconsciously clenched his fists. He was so close. If Prince Sting made it out of this unscathed, the emperor's trust in him would be absolute, and it would be impossible to make the legitimacy of his children an issue again. Once the heir was recognized by the imperial physicians, Prince Sting's status would only become more secure. To make the emperor suspicious of the young heir and rope in all the other princes as well, he'd used Consort Lu as the first step. If he kept hesitating, all the effort he'd put in would only end up in Prince Sting's favor. He'd made a mistake. He hadn't thought that was possible. But he'd received the news just in time. It wasn't too late yet. No pain, no gain. Hadn't he spent his entire life scheming for what he wanted? What was one more time? If Prince Ting could meddle, then why couldn't he? How could he possibly just give up now? Since he didn't know which bottle contained whose blood, he'd just make sure no one passed the test. That'd still work, right? The 8th prince's blood must be in one of the bottles. This younger brother of his was already so pitiful he didn't particularly want to harm him any more than he already had. But if the 8th prince wanted to blame someone, he should blame Prince Ting. The 6th prince passed along his instructions. His expression hardened as he said, "Have Imperial Physician Pan deal with it as soon as possible." Once he received the answer, Imperial Physician Pan headed back inside, distressed. By the time he returned to where the other Imperial physicians were, Imperial Physician Pan had come up with an idea. The secret to verifying the royal bloodline all came down to the fact that the founding emperor of the dynasty had once taken a medicine called Qilin Gold. This medicine wasn't special at first glance, but once a person ingested it, their blood would emit a faint golden light when it came into contact with an herb called dragon vine. The founding emperor had used this to signify that he bore the mandate of heaven and subsequently passed on the Qilin Gold effect to his descendants. Although it apparently grew dimmer with each passing generation, the blood of a true royal would still emit a faint golden light after coming in contact with dragon vine. Thus, the secret method to verifying the bloodline was dragon vine. The royal family wanted to keep this a secret, so dragon vine had more or less been completely destroyed, and there were only a few plants left growing in the imperial physician's garden. Imperial Physician Pan knew about dragon vine, and he'd done a lot of research on it. He had a small bottle of medicine in his medicine box with the ability to disrupt the effect of the dragon vine. He had prepared it just in case, but because he didn't know which bottle held the little Schütz's blood, he hadn't been able to interfere sooner. With the 6th prince's order to change everyone's result, he now had a plan in mind. Imperial Physician Pan dipped a silver needle into the medicine. With a casual flick, he changed the yes to a no. As this matter involved royal secrets, there were only a couple of imperial physicians in the tent, and guards were posted outside. While everyone else was busy, he poured his own medicine into all the bottles of gold. With his task completed, Imperial Physician Pan pretended that he'd just finished his tests and started to compare results with the other Imperial physicians. Naturally, he had different results. Imperial Physician Pan said, "Since we're doing this for the Emperor, how can we give him inconsistent results? Why don't we all test it again?" The other imperial physicians were disgruntled, but what he said was reasonable, so they agreed to do it again. As he watched the others test the blood with his added medicine, Imperial Physician Pan wiped the sweat off his forehead. He'd finally succeeded. Little did he know that a person behind the tent responsible for keeping an eye on him had seen everything he did and recorded it in a book. This time, the imperial physicians produced completely opposite results. The people the emperor asked them to test were not of royal blood. This result was extremely shocking. The imperial physicians verified it a few more times and even checked the dragon vine that was used, but there were no obvious problems. Imperial Physician Pan sighed theatrically. "If we hadn't retested, I'm afraid someone would have successfully tricked His Majesty." The imperial physicians were unable to find anything out of the ordinary, so they could only present the strange results. When the princess, clan elders, and Prince Li waiting in the dragon tent heard the news, their expressions darkened. The 8th prince's face turned pale, and he started to tremble. "Your Majesty, this..." While Prince Li was the one who proposed the test in the first place, he truly did not expect that neither Prince Ting's heirs nor the 8th prince were of royal blood. What a travesty! "Thank you for checking your work, imperial physicians," said the emperor, suppressing the thunder crackling in his eyes. "Otherwise, I might have been kept in the dark forever." When the 6th prince heard this, his heart skipped a beat. and he checked Prince Ding's consort's reaction. Li Yu was already on his knees, holding his children tightly in his arms, and had his head buried in his arms. The sixth prince couldn't see his expression, but he could clearly see the consort's trembling hands. He must be afraid because their lies had been exposed. The sixth prince was elated, but he followed everyone else's example and begged the emperor to calm down. "There must be an explanation," the emperor said. As he finished speaking, 2 groups of guards came into the tent, but instead of seizing the consort and Prince Ding's fake children like the sixth prince thought they would, the guards dragged out Imperial Physician Pan. Prince Li and the ministers were shocked. Masquerading as part of the royal bloodline was a serious crime, so they expected all those involved to be dealt with immediately, followed swiftly by several bloody executions. But unexpectedly, the emperor was starting with the imperial physician who seemed to have nothing to do with the situation. Imperial Physician Pan was scared witless by the fierce guards. Had the emperor somehow found out he'd interfered with the results? But nobody had been paying attention to him in the tent when it happened. How would the emperor know? Imperial Physician Pan tried to bluff. "Your Majesty, what have I done wrong?" Before he could even complete his sentence, the emperor chuckled coldly, and a guard forcefully threw a secret report at his face. Another guard took out his medicine box and opened it, removing the specific medicine with frightening accuracy. There was some medicine left in the bottle, as Imperial Physician Pan didn't have time to get rid of it. He'd kept the medicine with him to hide it in plain sight. He thought he was being smart. The emperor ordered the other imperial physicians to look into this medicine first, then the blood that they tested. After the imperial physicians smelled it and examined it carefully, they were furious. Alaman was present in Imperial Physician Pan's medical concoction, which would interfere with the effects of the dragon vine, meaning it would ruin the accuracy of the test. No wonder their results were all yes the first time, except Imperial Physician Pan's, and they turned to no after he suggested they retest. Imperial Physician Pan had obviously set things up. So, the most recent results were false. The imperial physicians all changed their tune, afraid the emperor would blame them too. Prince Li and the ministers hadn't even recovered from the last shock before they were shocked all over again. The 8th prince gazed at the emperor with admiration and gratitude. If not for the emperor, he would have been the victim of a terrible injustice. The 6th prince's expression had shifted when the emperor ordered the guards to grab Imperial Physician Pan, but before he could grasp what was going on, the situation had changed again. The imperial guards picked out an unassuming servant from the crowd. It was the servant he'd sent to make emergency contact with Imperial Physician Pan. Cold sweat from the 6th prince's forehead flowed into his eyes, and his vision turned blurry. "Whose servant is this?" the emperor asked lightly. The 6th prince didn't dare move or speak. He could feel the emperor's gaze on him. No matter what he said, if he spoke up, the emperor would arrest him. Since he couldn't think of a way to get out of this, he was just going to stop. The only thing in his mind was to find a way to protect himself. This particular servant was a distant relative of his mother's. The man's entire family was in his grasp, so he definitely wouldn't betray him. If anything happened, the servant was to take all the blame. His only fear was that Imperial Physician Pan would point him out after he was caught. But as long as the only accusation came from Imperial Physician Pan, the emperor couldn't do anything to him. The 6th prince often used letters against others, and so he and Imperial Physician Pan had never used letters to communicate, only spoken word. The same applied to him and his confidant as well. Just like the bribery case, as long as he refused to admit it, he couldn't be held accountable. No matter how angry the emperor was, he couldn't punish a prince on the basis of a single person's testimony. At most, they might find out that the confidant was a servant, but so what? He knew nothing of this. He was simply being deceived by those under him again. The emperor had captured Imperial Physician Pan and a servant. Everyone present, including Prince Li, was confused. "Your Highness, did this person do something?" Prince Li asked bravely. The emperor glanced at the sixth prince, but before he could answer, Dabao, who was in Li Yu's arms, raised his chubby little arm. Grandpa! Dabao knows the answer! The emperor was happy to indulge Dabao. He let Li Yu bring him up. Li Yu had practically begged Prince Jing to let him and Dabao participate in this play, but Dabao wanted to add scenes in the middle. And the emperor had even agreed. What could Li Yu do? He had to play along. The emperor held Dabao in his arms, and Dabao looked down at the dark crowd before him, utterly unafraid. The emperor was pleased by Dabao's courage. Dabao, what do you want to say? He teased. Dabao pointed at the man the guards had captured and said clearly, Grandpa, he's bad! Prince Li was flabbergasted. He'd seen a lot of people accusing others, but he'd never seen one like this. He knew that Prince Jing's Shritsu was favored, but he didn't know that he was so doted on that he dared to speak so directly in front of the princess. And the emperor, Prince Li peeked at the emperor's reaction. He was actually smiling. Do you know him, Dabao? The emperor asked. Of course Dabao knew him. This was the bad guy who had snuck into his room before. He remembered him. Dabao stuck out his thickly wrapped hand and said pitifully, He needle poke. Thanks to Dabao, Li Yu recognized the man now too. He muttered in his head, Son, wake up. This man did threaten your wet nurse and sneak into the manor, but this wasn't the man who poked you. Li Yu had just been thinking that he'd done a great job of playing his two roles, a worried consort and despairing consort, but in the face of Dabao's sad and pitiful gaze, he was nothing. The emperor took Dabao's cue. He was astounded by Dabao's words and actions and soon remembered that Prince Jing had mentioned that someone snuck into the manor to take Dabao's blood. Dabao must have seen and remembered him. Dabao is a witness, the emperor said, and I have a special witness myself. In the afternoon, Imperial Physician Pan sent off a pigeon informing someone of the results, that all the blood tested belonged to the royal family. Then, this man told his master of the news. Not long after, the man's master responded with a message to Imperial Physician Pan, ordering him to change all the results. The emperor recounted the conversation between the confidant and Imperial Physician Pan almost perfectly. The sixth prince had never expected the emperor to know all this as well. He was stupefied. How had the emperor found this out? If he knew even this, then did he know that the sixth prince was behind it? But what could he do? Before the emperor said anything about his identity, was he supposed to pull the rug out from under his own feet and confess to everything? There was no way he'd let that happen. As for Prince Li, initially, he was stunned when he heard the eighth prince and Prince Jing's sons weren't part of the royal bloodline. He'd looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Then, the emperor explained that someone had ordered Imperial Physician Pan to interfere with the results. Prince Li finally came back to his senses and got to the point. Your Majesty, who was behind Imperial Physician Pan? Since the emperor knew almost exactly what the two lackeys had discussed, he probably knew who was behind them too. But the emperor didn't answer. He remained silent for 10 minutes. During this time, the sixth prince felt like he was dancing on the tip of a knife, his heart threatening to beat out of his chest at any moment. He met the emperor's gaze several times. It wasn't the end yet. He forced himself to look like he didn't know anything, unaware that he couldn't hide the cold sweat that trickled down his forehead. The emperor sighed heavily. He'd been watching the sixth prince, waiting for him to confess. This pause was the sixth prince's last chance. If he admitted it, then the emperor might show him some mercy. But the sixth prince didn't react at all. The emperor finally lost his patience with his son. Tianxiao, he called out sternly. Almost everyone turned to look at the sixth prince. Mu Tianxiao closed his eyes, trying his best not to let his voice tremble along with his body. Royal father. After Imperial Physician Pan left the tent, my guards followed him, the emperor said at last. He released the pigeon, but the person he worked for was cunning and didn't leave behind any letters or messages, because they had agreed beforehand that the pigeon was the signal itself. When the servant met with Imperial Physician Pan, my guards followed him and found out who was behind them both. He looked at his son. Tian Xiao, while you were thinking about how to frame Prince Ting and the 8th Prince, I was just a wall away. I heard your order to make everyone fail the test. This scheme was your idea, and I am the special witness. I didn't disclose it right away because I wanted to see how far you would go. Mu Tianxiao felt the whole world darkening around him. Only the dragon-robed emperor remained. How did this happen? He desperately moved his lips, but he couldn't hear even if he said anything. Chapter 119. Fishy's Mercy. Mu Tianxiao was taken away by the guards, and the emperor dismissed everyone else. His punishment would be decided after they returned to the palace. The interrogation of concubine Lu's old acquaintance was also finished. The emperor found out that he had been drunk and confused. In a daze, he'd run onto the hunting grounds and into concubine Lu's tent. When he sobered up, he realized he'd made a huge mistake, but he didn't remember what had happened when he was drunk. It sounded like a simple case of drunken havoc, but the hunting grounds were heavily guarded. It should have been all but impossible for a civilian to enter. And how could such an inebriated man have found concubine Lu's tent when he wasn't familiar with the hunting grounds? Someone must have snuck the man in and led him to concubine Lu. Only someone of high status could do that. The emperor had already captured the 6th prince, and he was set on investigating him. After some hard work, they found out that the 6th prince's sedan chair had been in and out of the hunting grounds twice before the festival. As the 6th prince was at the front of the sedan and his consort was pregnant, the guards hadn't been able to take a clear look at the inside of the sedan. When the emperor had people verify the consort's alibi, he found out that Lady Liang hadn't left the hunting grounds since her arrival. That meant one of those sedan trips must have been to bring in the drunken man. The 6th prince had even used his pregnant wife as a shield. When he recalled Mu Tianxiao's disregard for his consort's health when he tried to use his unborn child as a way to win favor, the emperor wasn't surprised. But once they'd smuggled the man in, there must have been someone close to concubine Lu who coordinated with him. The emperor looked into the people who came in and out of concubine Lu's tent. During that time period, the most frequent visitor was an older female servant. Emperor Lu ordered her arrested for investigation, and an investigation revealed that she had once been a servant of Consort Li, the 7th prince's mother. As Consort Li and concubine Lu were close in age and both had sons, they were quite close. Concubine Lu liked the old servant's embroidery, so Consort Li had given her to the concubine. The moment the old servant was faced with the emperor's furious expression, she kowtowed before him repeatedly, like she was trying to hammer a nail into the floor with her head. With tears and snot streaming down her face, she said that the 6th prince had blackmailed her and ordered her to let a man into the tent while concubine Lu was resting. As expected, it was the 6th prince again. After some thought, the emperor realized why the 6th prince had chosen this servant to let the man into the tent. Since she'd been a gift from Consort Li, if the emperor didn't know the 6th prince was behind all this, a thorough investigation of this incident would have led him to the 7th prince's mother. The emperor had assumed the 6th prince was trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone with his plan, but there were far more birds being targeted here. He tried to bring down all the other princes with his plot. No wonder the 6th prince had taken the enormous risk of continuing with his plan even after he learned that everyone tested was of royal blood. It was the final barrier in his way to the throne, a huge temptation. If Prince Ting and the 8th prince were guilty of polluting the royal bloodline, and the 7th prince was implicated in the incident with concubine Lu, then the 6th prince would be the only candidate left. Though the emperor had seen many underhanded plots throughout his life, Mu Tianxiao's ruthlessness still had chills running down his back. He never would have imagined that the 6th prince could conceal himself so well. Fortunately, the emperor had been made aware of the six princes' ambition early on, thanks to Prince Ting and others. Using secret marks and anonymizing the bottles as bait for the six prince had been a suggestion from six princes' consort. Prince Ting was the one who tailed Imperial Physician Pan, and he was also the one who'd asked the emperor to sit and listen in on the six princes' conversation. There was nothing more convincing than hearing it with one's own ears. If the emperor's test for Prince Ting was still in progress, then at this moment, with the six princes' true self revealed, he had already made his decision. Royal Father, are you all right? Li Yu was worried about the emperor. Ever since the emperor had exposed the six prince in front of everyone, he'd been in a bit of a daze. What should we do if Grandpa is unhappy? The babies huddled together and whispered among themselves, working out a plan. Da Bao immediately went up to head eunuch Luo, holding a bowl of tea. The head eunuch Luo hurried to stop him. Schütze, you can't. Be careful, it's hot. Li Yu shook his head, smiling. The tea in front of the emperor was all at a drinkable temperature, so it wasn't hot. It was better to have children start doing chores at a younger age, and Da Bao was happy to start. Da Bao wanted Grandpa to cheer up. He walked unsteadily, but his grip on the tea was surprisingly stable. The emperor smiled as he watched the itty-bitty human bring the tea to him. Right when he was about to take the tea, Si Bao leaped out from behind Da Bao, yelling, "Ah!" to stop him. The emperor doted on Da Bao a lot, but that didn't mean he didn't dote on the other children as well. He wondered what Si Bao was going to do. Si Bao used his chubby little hand to lift the lid of the tea bowl and took several sips of the tea. He patted his stomach, now full of tea, and sternly nodded at Da Bao. Da Bao continued to walk over and brought the already drunk tea over to the emperor. What? For a moment, the emperor didn't react. Li Yu was flustered. Those two idiots! How could they give the emperor leftover tea? Li Yu was just about to take back the teacup with Si Bao's saliva on it when head eunuch Luo kneeled and cried with joy. How filial! Your Majesty, the young children are testing the tea for you. See? This was something head eunuch Luo did as well, so he recognized it immediately. He wouldn't drink from the cup itself, but the effect was the same. No way! How did the children know about something like this? It wasn't likely. Being the emperor was the most complicated job in the world, and Li Yu hadn't explained the significance of the role to the babies yet. Perhaps the babies got used to seeing head eunuch Luo doing the same thing since they were often at Tianqing Palace, and they'd learned it by watching. Perhaps, in the children's eyes, the emperor only ate leftovers? But head eunuch Luo had understood at least one thing correctly. This was indeed a demonstration of the children's filial piety toward the emperor. The emperor smiled and accepted the teacup. He took a sip, unbothered by the baby's saliva. His sons had always disappointed him, but it seemed there was always new hope in the world. After this chaos, the emperor was no longer in the mood to hunt. He quickly announced that the hunting festival was over. He would return to the palace. Prince Ting led Li Yu slowly toward the tent. When they'd first arrived at the hunting grounds, they were both incredibly tense, knowing the Sixth Prince was going to make a move. Now that the Sixth Prince had fallen, even though the emperor hadn't said anything, they knew that this day had determined the future. Li Yu had been aware of Prince Ting's protagonist halo for a while now. He thought about the hardships Prince Ting went through in the original novel to ascend to the throne. This time around, it had been a lot easier. But so what? Prince Ting had suffered so much in the original story. He deserved a chance to relax. Prince Ting was in charge of tracking the Sixth Prince today, but he still made sure to keep an eye on Li Yu and the children. Though the Sixth Prince was always nearby, Li Yu wasn't afraid. He knew that Prince Ting was close too, silently protecting him. Tianchi, are you tired? Li Yu asked quietly. Prince Ting shook his head and turned around to hold Li Yu's hand. They had some extra time, so they weren't in a hurry to return. Instead, they watched the hazy moonlight for a while. Everything would be different when they got back. I'll always be good to you. Prince Sting's lips moved in a silent promise. Liu batted his eyelashes to tell him, I know. He was about to say something else when a shadow suddenly rushed over and jumped out right in front of him. Liu was startled. Prince Sting moved in front of him, about to draw his sword, when Liu saw who it was. Tianchi, wait! He said quickly. The newcomer knelt down in a strange, twisted posture. Your Highness Prince Sting, consort, please, help me. The sixth prince's consort, Liang Suyuan, knelt before them, her face disheveled. Lady Liang! Behind her, a group of servants kept calling out to her, but she ignored them and stared at Li Yu and Prince Sting with tears in her eyes. Li Yu was shocked. What was going on? It was clearly inappropriate for Lady Liang to be kneeling before him and Prince Sting. Li Yu felt even more uncomfortable when he saw her slightly protruding abdomen. Don't be like this, he said, flustered. Quick, get up. He and Lady Liang were technically in-laws, but Prince Sting and the sixth prince were enemies now. At most, Li Yu and Lady Liang had just greeted each other in passing, and since he was a man and she was a woman, he wasn't close to her at all. It couldn't remotely compare to the friendship between him and the Princess of Jinjue. Please help me. I can only ask the two of you. She remained on the ground. The servant next to her wanted to help her up, but she refused and continued to kneel, wiping her tears. Li Yu exchanged a glance with Prince Sting. What is it? He asked. The emperor had ordered the imperial guards to arrest the sixth prince, and Lady Liang must have heard the news. Li Yu and Prince Sting were absolutely the ones responsible for the sixth prince's fate. So it was a bit awkward that Lady Liang was asking them for help, and Li Yu wasn't sure if this was another plot or not. I'm sorry. I know I'm being reckless. I want to see Tianxiao. Please help me, she begged. The emperor had exposed Mu Tianxiao's true personality in front of everyone, so the words sixth prince were like poison now. Nobody wanted to touch them. Anyone who had any sort of connection to the sixth prince in the past wanted to wash themselves of him now. When Lady Liang found out that the emperor had arrested the sixth prince, she fainted several times. When she woke up, she wanted to see the sixth prince no matter what. He was her husband, after all. Though he didn't treat her very well anymore, she couldn't just abandon him. Besides, she was pregnant with their child. But who could she ask? Consort Zhang didn't have any ideas, and she was hiding from her daughter-in-law too. The Marquis of Dingbei had been quite satisfied with the sixth prince before, but now that all this had happened, his daughter's marriage would implicate him. There was nothing he'd like more right now than for her to divorce the sixth prince, so there was no way he'd be willing to help her. The emperor didn't give Lady Liang any chances either. Every time she asked to speak with him, head eunuch Luo would come out and tell her to take good care during her pregnancy. Lady Liang had looked around and begged everyone she could, but she was left with no other choice but to shamelessly plead with Prince Sting and his consort. She'd heard that one of the reasons for the sixth prince's plot was to try to frame Prince Sting, but she didn't know of anyone else who had the power to help her. You want us to help you see the sixth prince? Li Yu repeated. Lady Liang nodded quickly. Consort, I just want to see him from a distance. I would be immensely grateful. She kept kowtowing at them, and when he saw the way she avoided her belly every time, Li Yu couldn't bear it. The sixth prince was their enemy, but Li Yu pitied his consort. Wasn't that unbelievable? Be careful. Prince Sting's gaze warned him. I don't have any bad intentions, really. I just need your help. The sixth prince's consort was almost in despair. Tianchi, Li Yu hesitated, glancing at Prince Sting. He was also a parent. He noticed that Lady Liang was always protecting her stomach, so he was sure she wasn't pretending. The sixth prince was despicable, but Lady Liang herself hadn't harmed them. Li Yu instinctively wanted to help her, and it was something he could accomplish with little effort. It wasn't like he'd have to do much. They couldn't let the sixth prince's consort see him without the emperor's permission, though. Li Yu wasn't planning on doing something different. He didn't think he'd survive attempting any other option. All he had to do was beg the Emperor's mercy and ask him to let the two of them meet. "Just this one time?" Li Yu asked Prince Ting quietly. "Is that okay?" Xiao Yu was pitying her. Prince Ting understood. He squeezed Li Yu's hand. It was a bit risky, but the sixth prince's consort was in their control. Prince Ting looked at him and smiled. "You make the decisions." Li Yu felt sweetness blossom in his heart for a second. At that moment, the system, which had been silent since the main mission Share the Country was announced, suddenly sent a notification. "User, you have met the conditions for activating the side mission, Heart of Compassion." Helping Lady Liang was a side quest? Li Yu was baffled. The fish scamming system had said that sharing the country was the last main mission, but there hadn't been any updates after the sixth prince was arrested. Li Yu assumed he would have to wait until Prince Ting ascended the throne, which was fine by him, since he had all the time in the world. The system had previously told him that he could choose to complete a side mission whenever he wanted. Li Yu couldn't even remember the last time he'd completed one. The reward for Heart of Compassion is an ancient medicine prescription. Would you like to begin this mission? Ancient medicine prescription? Li Yu was a little surprised. What kind of reward was that, and what was it for? The fish scamming system existed to scam him. It wouldn't explain anything it didn't absolutely have to. It was just like with the fish plush. The system wouldn't tell him how to use it. Li Yu would have to figure it out on his own. An ancient medicine prescription sounded pretty good, though. It was better than nothing. If he didn't need it, then he'd just hold onto it. It might become useful one day. Besides, he wasn't doing it for the reward. He truly did want to help the abandoned Lady Liang. Chapter 120. Fishy rescuing the Emperor. Having decided he'd help Lady Liang, Li Yu didn't want her to have to make another trip, so he pulled her along directly with Prince Ting to ask to see the Emperor. The Emperor was surprised that Li Yu wanted to help her, but he remembered the way Li Yu educated his children. Li Yu was a kind-hearted person, he concluded. "That's what he wants. What about you?" the Emperor asked Prince Ting, wanting to know his opinion. Prince Ting nodded, showing that he supported Li Yu. "In that case, I'll allow it." The Emperor was happy to give Prince Ting and his spouse what they wanted. He thought of reminding them both about something, but after a moment of thought, he decided to keep it to himself. Li Yu quickly told Lady Liang the news. She was afraid that the guards would stop her, so she asked Li Yu to go with her. He hesitated for a moment, but he thought he should see things to the end, so, with Prince Ting's agreement, they all accompanied Lady Liang to the tent where the sixth prince was being held. They couldn't go any further. Li Yu had to be careful and, besides, it wasn't like he was the one who wanted to see the sixth prince. Lady Liang entered the tent, thanking him the entire time. When she saw Mu Tianxiao covered in dirt with his hands and feet bound, she couldn't stop her tears flowing from her red, swollen eyes. "Suyun, why are you here?" Mu Tianxiao was elated to see his wife. The guards responsible for him didn't let him see anyone, so how had she managed to get in? Did this mean the Emperor was relenting a little? "Did Royal Father tell you to come?" he asked anxiously. "Has he forgiven me?" "It was me. I begged Prince Ting and his consort for help, so Royal Father showed me some mercy," Lady Liang explained timidly, afraid the sixth prince would be upset. "Prince Ting again." Mu Tianxiao's expression changed as soon as he heard Prince Ting's name, and he pushed his wife's hand away impatiently. "Why did you ask him of all people? Don't you know he's the one who did this to me?" Having reflected on his failure, the sixth prince believed he'd fallen into one of Prince Ting's traps. The Emperor must have started targeting him because he believed Prince Ting's lies. The sixth prince blamed everything on Prince Ting. Lady Liang wiped her tears, unsure how to answer. Should she tell him that nobody was willing to help them now? Since Mu Tianxiao was already locked up, there was no need for him to keep hiding his true nature. He started cursing out Prince Ting's family, even the young children. It was hard to listen to. After he was done, he seemed to finally remember something. He turned to look at Lady Liang, his tone turning gentle. Suyun, don't cry. He wiped the tears from her face. Since you're here, can you help me beg Royal Father? He said expectantly. He'll definitely let me out for the sake of our unborn child. I'll be good to you in the future, I promise. Lady Liang listened to his repeated assurances, but her heart stung when she saw the fake smile on his face, devoid of warmth. How could she have been tricked by this man before? This husband of hers looked gentle on the surface, but he only ever thought of himself. Li Yu and Prince Ting were standing outside the tent, and they could hear the six prince cursing them. Prince Ting was used to people talking about him like that, and he didn't mind it. But when the six prince started cursing about Xiao Yu and the children, his expression darkened, and his grip on his sword tightened. Li Yu grabbed his arm. Tianchi, don't. When Li Yu first heard the six prince cursing out his sons and his husband, he also wanted to march in there and beat him up. But there was no way he could let Prince Ting actually walk in there and teach the six prince a lesson. Mu Tianxiao was the emperor's prisoner right now, so it wasn't appropriate to beat him up in front of everyone. Prince Ting's current status meant that he could make the six prince's life a little harder, but there was no need for him to handle anything personally. It would make the emperor suspicious. Li Yu whispered a few ways to humble the six prince into Prince Ting's ear, and when he finished, Prince Ting stared at him, speechless. This was the same man who had been soft-hearted enough to help Lady Liang just now. Li Yu mischievously stuck out his tongue. Those two things are different. Lady Liang is quite pitiful, but the sixth prince has done so many evil things. I wouldn't forgive him just like that. Xiao Yu was always reasonable. Prince Ting patted his head and smiled, convinced. The sixth prince started throwing out ugly curses again. The two of them looked at each other and pretended not to hear anything. Lady Liang hadn't just come to see how the sixth prince was doing. She'd been hoping he would realize the error of his ways and live a peaceful life from now on. The sixth prince wanted the throne, and Lady Liang, who was his spouse, had more or less figured it out. In the past, she'd thought that a wife shouldn't get in the way of her husband's ambitions. And besides, what woman didn't fantasize about having a higher status? And so she never stopped him. But she didn't participate either. She regretted being so delusional in the past. How much better would things be now if she'd convinced him to stop back then? She didn't dare hope for anything else, only for her husband and child to be safe. His eyes widened in disbelief. It was one thing if she didn't want to help him, but why was she criticizing him now? Her status as a prince's consort was all thanks to him. What good would it be to her if the emperor kept him locked up? The sixth prince was furious, but he had another plan. He gave her a thin smile. You're right, Suyun, come here. I have another secret to tell you. Lady Liang was utterly unguarded against him, so she came closer, only for Mu Tianxiao to coldly wrap his chains around her neck. Tianxiao, what are you doing? She screamed, horrified. Don't move. Mu Tianxiao kept a tight grip on her neck and shouted toward the outside. Someone come! I want to see the emperor, or else I'll kill her. I'll kill her. Those three words shattered the relationship between the sixth prince and Lady Liang. She looked at him tearfully, feeling as if her heart was slowly being squeezed to death. Prince Ting and Li Yu were just outside, and they rushed in with the guards as soon as they heard the commotion. Li Yu didn't know what to say when he saw the sixth prince's hold on the consort. With his bloodshot eyes and fierce expression, shouting that he wanted to see the emperor, the sixth prince looked like a demon. The guards were already running to report the incident. Watching Lady Liang struggle, Li Yu wanted to help, but he was afraid that the sixth prince would actually hurt her. Mu Tianxiao, have you no conscience? He spoke up on her behalf instead. She's your wife. She's pregnant with your child. How come he was always running into situations that turned out worse than the original book? The sixth prince scoffed a couple of times, and a tear seemed to flash in the corner of his eye. I might not even be able to save myself, he said indifferently. Why would I need a wife or a child? Soon the emperor arrived, and he was furious at the six princes' threats. "Mu Tianxiao, are you insane?" he bellowed. "Let go of Lady Liang." "Royal father, you're here. Please listen to me one last time. I just realized that I didn't do anything wrong. I was framed by Prince Sing. Royal father, you don't know what a scheming person he is. He planned everything." Mu Tianxiao tried his hardest to defend himself while Prince Sing stood there and listened, unmoved. The emperor shook his head in disappointment. "That's enough, Tianxiao. Weren't you the one who tried to frame concubine Lu? Didn't you bribe imperial physician Pan? Didn't you send someone to sneak into Prince Sing's manor to steal Dabao's blood? Did Prince Sing force you to do all this?" Mu Tianxiao was stunned. "Royal father, how did the emperor even know about him sending someone to extract Dabao's blood?" It was likely he'd suddenly been enlightened. Mu Tianxiao finally figured it out. So, Prince Sing had already guessed what he was going to do from that very moment. How funny. When he thought he had an advantage over the other party, they were already waiting for him to fall into a trap. "Royal father, Prince Sing really was plotting against me." Mu Tianxiao was furious. He wanted to expose Prince Sing. "That's enough!" The emperor interrupted him icily. "Why should I believe someone who doesn't even care for his wife and child over Prince Sing? Tianxiao, there's a phrase you've said before to escape punishment. I return it to you now. All of this is just one side of the story." "Royal father!" Mu Tianxiao was stunned. He started laughing, as if the emperor had just told a joke. After he was done laughing, he gritted his teeth, staring fiercely at Prince Sing and the emperor with the gaze of a trapped beast. "What nonsense! You just favor Prince Sing. You never believed me." An imperial guard moved behind the sixth prince and struck his neck. At the same time, the sixth prince yelled hoarsely, "Do it now!" "No!" Li Yu realized that one of the six princes' people must be in the tent with them. Someone had taken advantage of the chaos and tried to stab the emperor. This was the six princes' final plan, to attack the person he hated the most at a critical moment. Mu Tianxiao hated his birth and hated Prince Sing, who took everything from him. But he hated his father the most. His father, the one who never liked him no matter how hard he tried to please him, the one who never took him seriously. He knew the emperor wouldn't kill him, but he couldn't stand the thought of going back to the invisible person he used to be. At that moment, Li Yu was the closest to the emperor, so he pushed him aside. But it was too late to dodge, and he was left vulnerable to the dagger. "Xiao Yu!" Millions of shots burst in Prince Sing's chest, and he ran over frantically, his sword drawn. Time seemed to stand still. Li Yu closed his eyes in fear. The sounds of wind and human chaos echoed in his ears. He waited. There was no pain. Li Yu opened his eyes. There was a palace servant holding a dagger in front of him. The tip of the dagger was only a finger's length away from him. With a clang, the dagger fell to the ground. Prince Sing's sword had pierced through the servant's chest from behind. Prince Sing saved him. "It's Tianchi, I'm fine," Li Yu yelled, his voice rough with emotion. Prince Sing pulled his sword out coldly and kicked the servant to the side. Li Yu rushed toward him, and Prince Sing embraced him. The imperial guards had pinned the sixth prince to the ground, so he couldn't move, while Lady Liang had been rescued and was watching in horror. The sixth prince was devastated. In the end, he still wasn't able to even touch the emperor's dragon robes. He suddenly noticed a beauty dressed in palace robes among the tumultuous crowd. That person was as beautiful as an immortal in a painting and was watching quietly with apathetic, delicate eyes. We know who that is. Mu Tianxiao stared avidly at this person for a while before he remembered who it was. It was the emperor's new concubine, noble Lady Chu, a chess piece that he had personally delivered onto the emperor's bed. His. "Yar, help me." Mu Tianxiao begged silently as he lay on the ground. He still had hope. Chu Yanyu was his last hope. Chu Yanyu seemed to have seen him too. He smiled at him from a distance. as gently as he once had in the past. Then he turned around and left without any hesitation, taking Mu Tianxiao's hope with him. The emperor was unharmed after that false alarm, but he no longer intended to show any mercy to the sixth prince, who had dared try to assassinate him. "Just kill me," Mu Tianxiao muttered as he was tied up and taken away by the guards. Lady Liang knelt on the ground, sobbing. "Tianchi!" Li Yu held onto Prince Ting tightly. He had been so terrified just now. At the time, he was thinking about the grandpa emperor who was kind and affectionate to his children, but the emperor was also Prince Ting's father. The sixth prince assassination attempt had been so sudden that the only thought in Li Yu's mind had been saving the emperor. Prince Ting didn't blame Li Yu for being reckless. Instead, he hugged him and patted his head. Perceptively, Li Yu noticed that Prince Ting's complexion seemed a bit off. "What's wrong? Are you feeling unwell?" Li Yu asked, concerned. Something really did seem to be bothering Prince Ting. He gently let go of Li Yu and pressed his hand to his chest. Li Yu had never seen him wheeze so severely. Prince Ting suddenly coughed several times, and a streak of black blood seeped out between his fingers. "Tianchi, what's wrong?" Li Yu was terror-stricken. All right, everyone, that concludes the reading of these last few chapters, and I think this is a good stopping point before the next video. Oh, wow. Boy, was there so much. These chapters were nothing but a bunch of goodies. Way to start off the 4th volume, Xue Shan Fei Hu. So I only have a couple of notes, and I'm going to start at the top. I'm relieved. I'm happy that the emperor finally used his brain, because so many times before he had gotten so gullible and just, fell for every little thing. But that was not the case this time. Although I do have to admit that overall, the plan that the sixth prince devised was clever. But he was so sure of himself that he couldn't even see his own, number one, desperation and flaws in his plans, but he also couldn't see the cunning of those he was combating against, essentially, and that's what got him in his mess. And I just thought it was crazy, like when the whole thing went down and he had the message sent to Imperial Physician Pond to just screw up everyone's tests. I was like, sir, like, I'm not rooting for him to win and I want him to make the mistake, but I was like, sir, that is a dead giveaway that someone is plotting. That's a desperate and unwise move. Don't do that. But he did it anyway. So, it is what it is. Next, y'all already know, I just have to make a tiny comment on the cute little babies. Okay, Dabao and Subao were so freaking adorable. I'm telling you, I just love these children. But I'm also glad that it was mentioned that they matured faster as fish, because that was something that I had said before and that had been verified. So for them to just oh my God, for Dabao to present the tea and then Subao was like, hold on, brother. Let me test it for poison. That was so cute. Oh my gosh. And then oh my gosh, on page 65, when it was talking about the medicinal reward for doing the whole heart of compassion thing, I was thinking, hear me out, okay? Maybe it's the same medicine that Prince Ting's wet nurse took. And maybe, just maybe, it is the cure to his muteness. And another maybe, just maybe, that's why she was murdered. Okay, anyway, the last thing I'll say is really quick, and that's about Chu Yanyu. I called it in the one of them previous videos that malicious, or that what kind of look did he have? I don't remember. The look that he had that the sixth prince couldn't see, I figured it was because he was going to start looking out for himself, and that is exactly what he did. And you know what? Good for him. Because clearly, if the sixth prince was willing to kill his own wife and unborn child, he definitely did not care about you. And so I'm actually happy that Chu Yen Yu got his happy ending. I still think that what he did before to Prince Sting was absolutely horrible, or what he attempted to do was absolutely horrible. But, he was blinded by his love and dedication to Mu Tianxiao. Is that an excuse? No, but it's understandable, and I can forgive him. So, that was great. Wow. Now we need to figure out what's going on with Prince Sting, though. So, hurry up tomorrow, come, so that we can go ahead and start reading to see why he's spitting up black blood, because that's a problem. Okay. Well, Animan.